It's kind of what was going on, isn't it? But this is perfectly consistent with that idea when Jesus says, or Paul says, that no man seeks God. He's come seeking us. You know, Luke 19, Jesus says, I came to seek and save that which is lost. Talking about he's on a rescue mission looking for us. But it wasn't until this man focused his attention on Jesus and saw that Jesus may have had something he needed that things began to change. Isn't it? I mean, read the text. Don't take my word for it. This man is seeking healing, yes. Diligently seeking it. But it's through the waters at that pool, but he's soon going to find out that the source of the healing he needs is not in that water. It's in the person of Jesus Christ. You follow the thing about seeking. That Jesus has these things. So, you know, to beat that drum again, when we seek for comfort, the comfort comes in the person of Jesus Christ, which is a song that John sang, as well with my soul. The wellness comes in the person of Jesus Christ. It doesn't come in our job. It doesn't come in all these other things. Like I said, like this man, it's only when we realize that what we really need can only be found in Jesus do we begin to start realizing it's God who has what we really need. You see, in a certain sense, until we realize that it's God who has a handle on and holds and owns every single thing we need, we're still kind of wandering lost. We're still kind of misguided. And possibly very immature. Because as we mature, we begin to sing and see that, yes, you are my all in all. But that's not where I wanted to go. You see, prior to this fellow's realization, epiphany, or I don't know what you'd want to call it, this revelation of Jesus, he was lost in his own might, just as we're lost in our own might. And it's that point when we realize our own might doesn't get the job done, and we start to realize where the source of everything we need resides. As we read on in this little story, there's a little bit more fine print that Jesus feels compelled to communicate with this fellow. If you look at how the story played out, what happened? He healed him. The religious leaders were kind of upset, so Jesus kind of exit stage left, or whichever way. Took off. But if we read a little bit farther, we get down to verse 14, and here's the rest of the story. Now remember, things are put in this word for a reason. Each and every word, each and every sentence, God chose to put in this book for a reason. I sense that if this were a steak, it'd be really lean. There's not a whole lot of fat in it. Not a whole lot of filler. But in verse 14 it says, later Jesus found him, the man who was healed, at the temple and said to him, see, you are well again. But then he says this next thing, which kind of like gets pulled out of left field. He says, stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you. Now that's never tagged on to the story. But evidently God wanted to put in there for a reason, because it's in here, right? Stop sinning or something worse may happen to you. The man went away and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who made him well. Well, if we reflect on the story, we can see that this encounter with Jesus seems to have had some far-reaching implications, doesn't it? It wasn't as simple as a guy who was crippled encountering the Lord of glory, being made to walk, but Jesus felt compelled to come back and say, oh, by the way, here's some more information I need to pass on to you. Again, Jesus sought him out. As I said, the story had, this encounter with Jesus seemed to have some far-reaching implications. Stop sinning or something worse may happen to you. Now, what does he mean by that? Now think about that. Something worse than where he was. At this point, I'd like to point out that most commentaries that I read start about this statement, or something worse will happen to you, they begin to assume something that's not in the text. They'll say, well, the interpretation, though it's not clearly stated, that Jesus is telling him that his illness was because of a previous sin, and if he returns to his condition, it will be worse. Well, the text doesn't say that. We don't know why he was an invalid. We don't know why he couldn't walk. It may have been about sin, it may not have been about sin. Because if you go to John 9, 4 chapters later, there's a guy who's born blind, right? And religious leaders are saying to him, well, what sin did this guy do to be born blind? And what Jesus said? Nothing. He had to be born blind so that what I can do can be seen in him. So what we do not know about this story is always dangerous to build your theology on something the Bible does not say. You want to go from the main things to the plain things that it says and build on that. So what we know is Jesus said, stop sinning. We don't know if the sin had anything to do with his affliction. That was a common thought in the Jewish mind at that time, but the text does not say it. So I fear that if we were to make this assumption, we might look like those religious leaders in John 9. If we assume that his disability was related to his sin, we might be making that error. We don't know why he was crippled. We don't know if it was about sin. We don't know. We just don't know. The text doesn't say. But we do know what Jesus says is, stop sinning or something worse may happen. If something happened with this encounter with Jesus that created a reality shift. So I said what we need to wrestle is what the Bible is saying and not what it's not saying. Now, this idea of stop sinning or something else worse may happen, does this disturb anybody else? I mean, or am I the only one paranoid? Or does this bother anybody else, the idea that Jesus may say to us, stop sinning or something worse can happen? Does it bug you guys? It does me. I don't know, maybe you're just paranoid this morning. I don't know. So I ask, is there anything to this? Is there anything to this when Jesus says, after this encounter, stop sinning or something else worse can happen? Is there anything to it? So how does this idea of something worse happening line up with the rest of the Bible? Is there anything else in the Bible that speaks to this idea of stop what you're doing or it's going to get worse? Well, it appears there is. This is not the first time Jesus has spoken to this. He spoke about it a few times. One of them is in Matthew 18. Remember the story of the unmerciful servant? The guy who had his debt wiped out? And then when he didn't pass on the mercy to the person who owed him money, what happened? He was getting thrown out in the outer darkness and all that gnashing of teeth stuff. But in that Matthew 18, Jesus tells a story where it said the master ordered that the debtor, he and his wife and children, be sold so that all the debt could be repaid. So the master says the children and women and all the property had to be sold to repay the debt. But then we look a little bit farther when this guy went on doing the same old stuff, and the same master who was just going to sell off the property and the kids says, in anger, the master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay it all back. You following what Jesus is saying? Here's the story of the guy was just going to have to pay the money back. Because he went about his business, now he's going to get tortured and have to pay every cent back. Does that sound like going bad to worse, or am I? So there's this idea that when you encounter Jesus, that there seems to be some type of, hopefully, expectation.